Test 1, 2, 3.
One two testing 1 2. Are you getting me? 1 2 1 2 2 2 1 1 1. One two two 1 1 2 testing 1 2 1 1 1 2 1 1 1.
No, just take them.
Just bang it and say, take your seats.
Ask them to take their seat.
Dear delegates, please take your seats. Please take your seats. We are going to start. Delegates, I'm requesting you to take your seats, please. Please take your seats. I think we can just start and then they'll take their seats. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We would like to call the meeting to order. I invite you, as I said earlier, to take your seats. I will now hand over to my co-chair, Basil.
Distinguished delegates, we welcome all of you here in Montreal and call to order the first plenary session of the 5th meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We would like to express our thanks to Ms. Elizabeth Mauma-Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, for her support in organizing this meeting and for welcoming us to Montreal, the home of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. We would also like to thank the President of COP15, His Excellency Mr. Huang Ronqiu, represented here by Mrs. Zhu Guomei, and all the members of the COP Bureau for their guidance in organizing this 5th meeting. Delegates, it's a great pleasure for us to meet here again in Montreal. We've truly come a long way since the first meeting of the working group in Nairobi in August 2019. After more than 3 years of hard work, we now have reached the home stretch. My co-chair and I would like to express our sincere thanks to parties and stakeholders for your support and tremendous efforts to advance the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework through the past years. In view of the very short time we have available for this meeting, we will not open the floor for a general opening statement. We ask for the indulgence of delegates and representatives in this regard. Francis?
Dear delegates, at its 14th meeting, the COP decided that at its 15th meeting, it would adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Allow me to remind you that we now have only 3 days left to complete the mandate of the working group. That is, to prepare a final draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for adoption at Part 2 of COP15. My co-chair and I are committed to work with you all to arrive at a text with no square brackets and a concise and communicable formulation for each goal and target. We urge all the delegates from parties and observers to work together in a spirit of cooperation and compromise, focusing on the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature that unites us. Considering the urgency of our work, the working group, at its 4th meeting, agreed to convene a small, regionally balanced, informal group to prepare proposals for a streamlined text for the framework. We will hear a report on the outcomes of the work of this group under item 3 and consider how we use the outcomes under item 4. Building on all the progress made since Nairobi, we are here today to make our final efforts to further consolidate our ambition for transformative change into a realistic and practical framework. My co-chair and I count on your support to ensure the successful conclusion of the working group.
Distinguished delegates, let us now turn to the next item on our agenda, item 2, on the organization of work. Before we do that, I invite the Secretariat to provide us with some general information on the logistical arrangements. Secretariat?
Thank you, co-chairs. And good morning, distinguished delegates. It is a great pleasure to see you all in person again. Regarding the COVID measures in place during this meeting, you have been provided with test kit for the duration of the meeting. Please ensure that you test yourself prior to arrival on site each day and present the negative test upon entry. If you have tested positive, please advise the Secretariat at secretariat.cbd.int email, and do not come to the site until you are tested negative. Along with the test kits, you have also been provided with masks. Kindly note that masks are mandatory on site, except while eating and drinking and when directly addressing the meeting. Off-site, kindly note that the Government of Quebec and public health officials have recommended wearing of masks in all public places. Please note that we have several cloakrooms available to us to store our outerwear. All items should be picked up by midnight. After that time, only any remaining items will be moved to a single cloakroom located on the ground floor. Please note that the cloakroom should not be used for storing your valuables. Upon entrance to this meeting hall, you have been provided a headset. Kindly be sure to return on your way out at the end of this plenary. Regarding the use of microphones, if you wish to speak, please press the button in front of you only once. The green light will turn on and you will be notified of your request. Please note that pressing the button twice will cancel the request to speak. When it is your turn to speak, the co-chair will invite you to speak. The light will turn red and the technicians will turn on your microphone. Please remove your headset and start speaking. Please speak close to the microphone, slowly and clearly, so that the interpreters can provide a clear translation. Please note that some delegates from observers are identified in our system only by a number and not their organization name. When your microphone is on, please identify your organization before commencing your intervention. With regard to statements made, delegates are requested to upload them in advance using the online application on the meeting page. This greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters. Statements will be posted on the website after delivery if you agree to this when uploading them. Statements must be uploaded within 1 hour after the end of the session in which your intervention was made. Please be sure to include the name of your country, organization, and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. To upload a statement, please select the meeting from the conference page at www.cbd.int/conferences/2021-2022 and click the Upload Statements tab. You will need to enter your priority passcode or batch number. It is also possible to upload your statement via the Schedule tab. Please note that this function is not for use during the contact groups, when intervention should only be made in the room. Interventions on each agenda item from parties and observers will be limited to 6 minutes on behalf of regions or groups, 3 minutes for individual parties, and 3 minutes for major groups and observers, respectively, as time allows. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Dear delegates, we will now take up agenda item 2, and this is on the organization of work. As for previous meetings, the rules of procedure for the meetings of the Conference of the Parties apply mutatis mutandis to the meetings of the working group. At its meeting held yesterday, the Bureau designated Ms. Eugenia Montezuma of Costa Rica to be the rapporteur of this meeting. If we see no objection, we would like to invite Ms. Montezuma to join us at the podium. I invite Ms. Montezuma to take a seat at the podium. We thank Ms. Montezuma for agreeing to assume this responsibility, and we look forward to working together in the coming days.
Distinguished delegates, let us now turn to provisional agenda for the organization of the work. The provisional agenda is contained in document CBD Working Group 2020-05, and the annotation to the provisional agenda are contained in document CBD Working Group 2020-51, Addendum 1. The provisional agenda was prepared in consultation with the President and Bureau of the Conference of the Party. With the guidance of the Bureau, we've also prepared a proposed organization of the works, which is set out in the annex to the scenario note, document CBD, Working Group 2020-5-1, Addendum 2. These meetings begin and ends with plenary meetings. As we noted earlier, in the interest of time, we will not hear General's opening statements. In today's plenary, we will consider agenda item 3, under which we will hear reports on the intersessional work. We will then open our work on item 4 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and on agenda item 5 on digital sequence information. Most of our work over the 3 days will be conducted in contact group, which will be established under these 2 agenda items. It is proposed to establish the same set of contact groups which we had established at our 4th meeting. We will provide further details later in this session under the respective agenda item. Please note that the proposed timing for the contact group in the annex of the scenario note is only indicative, and that we will manage the overall time allocation in an adaptive manner, considering the progress of the different contact group and the overall time limit. At the closing of the plenary on Monday, 5 December, we will hear reports from all co-leads regarding the progress made in their respective contact group and consider the outcome of their work, including the draft text of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and draft decision on digital sequence information on genetic resources, with a view to submitting them to the COP. We will also consider any other matters under agenda item 6 and adopt the meeting report. With this explanation and understanding, we now submit the provisional agenda as contained in document CBD Working Group 2020-5-1 for adoption, and the organization of work contained in document CBD Working Group 2020-5-1 Addendum 2 for approval. We see no objection. I see a request for the floor. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I wish to greet all the participants of this working group. Co-chairs, we have a question not on the agenda. We agree with the agenda and we support it. Our question is on the planned meeting schedule. Can I ask that question now?
Thank you, Russia. If your question is, we're going to try to adopt the agenda, so if you support the agenda, let's move with the adoption of the agenda, and then we'll consider your question after.
Okay, thank you.
So, colleagues, if I don't see any other requests for the floor, we will adopt the agenda. The agenda is adopted. Russia, would you like to ask your question now or at a subsequent point?
Спасибо, господин.
Thank you, Co-Chair. My question has to do with the organization of work and the fact that the organization of work proposed envisages the holding of contact group meetings at the same time, and that means that there must be at least 2 experts to be able to work in that format. Our expert did not get his visa on time and had to return his tickets, and he's not here, and he cannot participate. Therefore, we would like him to be provided with the opportunity to speak online with the right to a vote, and for those sessions that are being carried out in parallel. So I would like to ensure and receive your confirmation that over the next 3 days, he will be able to participate online with the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. I have confirmed with the Secretariat that online participation will be possible.
So please provide in this case the right link with the speaker mode.
I get confirmation that will be provided. Thank you, Russia.
Спасибо.
Distinguished delegate, we've now completed item 2 of the agenda and the organization of work of our meeting. We will now move on to the next agenda item. CBD. Where is it? Yeah, Francis.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair. Dear delegates, let us now turn to agenda item 3, reports from the subsidiary bodies. Distinguished delegates, under this agenda item, my co-chair and I will begin with the report of the work of the informal group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We will then hear reports from the chair of subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, SABSTA, on the intersessional work on the development of the monitoring framework, including the outcome of the expert workshop on the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and this is contained in document CBD/ID/OM/2022/1/2. And also we shall hear from the chair of the subsidiary body on implementation on the intersessional work on resource mobilization and mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. My co-chair and I would like now to begin with a report on the work of the informal group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Dear delegates, as mentioned earlier in this session, despite all the progress we made on the draft text of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in Nairobi last June, we knew the draft was not ready to be presented at COP at part 2 of its 15th meeting. Much work still remained to be done. This is why, at the end of our meeting in Nairobi, we had suggested to the working group to hold its 5th meeting and the final meeting of the working group. The Bureau of the COP decided to organize this meeting immediately preceding COP 15. To facilitate the negotiation at its 5th meeting, the working group had also agreed to our proposal to organize a meeting of a small, regionally balanced, informal group. The group comprised experts from parties and were tasked to, 1, review text from the Nairobi meeting to address coherence, redundancies, consistency, and ease of communication. 2, identify potential technical solutions, and 3, provide technical analysis of options for the way forward. Under the guidance of the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties, the informal group was convened in Montreal from 26 to 30 September. The full report of the meeting is available as document CBD/post-2020/OM/2022/12. The members of the informal group participated in their personal capacity as experts, not as representatives of their country or region. The IG did not negotiate any text, as that was beyond its mandate. IPLC representatives were engaged to provide inputs to the meeting of the informal group prior to the meeting and also during the meeting through online participation. The co-chairs have also briefed IPLC representatives on the outcome of the IG meeting. The outcome of the work of the informal group are provided in document CBD/WG2020-05/2, which is available in 6 languages of the United Nations. This document contains technical observations and analysis of the text from the 4th meeting based on the discussion of the informal group and proposed streamlined text applying the technical observations and analysis. The streamlined text is about 25% shorter than the original text and has about half the number of square brackets. We believe the text that came out of the IG meeting is more readable, thereby making the different options and points of divergence more clearly visible. We thank the members of the informal group for their hard work and efforts to support the work of the working group. We will come back to the outcomes of this under agenda item 4 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Over to you, Co-Chair.
Let us now hear the report on intersectional work from the Chair of SUBSTA and SBI. Starting with SUBSTA, I will now like to give the floor to the Chair of SUBSTA, Mr. Ezequiel Benitez-Diaz of Mexico, to deliver his report. Ezequiel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I will refer to the monitoring framework, which is an important part of this meeting. At its 14th meeting, the Conference of the Parties decided on the preparatory process for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, Decision 1434, Annex. An initial version of the monitoring framework was prepared alongside with the zero draft of the GBF, and in response to SUBSTA Recommendation 23.1, in which requests the Executive Secretary to prepare a document on options for a monitoring framework, taking into account the outcomes of the second meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group, and to submit the document to SUBSTA 24 for its consideration. The monitoring framework at the online SUBSTA 24 Part 1 conduct a survey on the headline indicators. The Secretariat further revised the monitoring framework and made it available for the third meeting of the open-ended working group and for Substat 24 Part 2. At Substat 24 Part 2 in Geneva, we had in-depth discussions on the proposed headline indicators and potential headline indicators producing the Substat 24 Recommendation 2. However, in Recommendation Annex 1, which includes the list of headline, component, and complementary indicators, was not populated. Substat 24 also requests the Executive Secretary in his Recommendation 24-2 to, under the guidance of the Substat Bureau, to compile comments from parties, other governments, and relevant stakeholders, and to facilitate a scientific and technical review, ensuring consultation with parties, including through the organization of an expert workshop of the proposed indicators on the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Secretariat invited comments on the indicators through notification 2022-34, held an expert workshop on indicators in Bonn from the 29th June to July 1st, conduct a further scientific and technical review of the component and complementary indicators based on the criteria in the draft decision. This process has been used to populate the tables in the COP15-2 draft decision under 9B on the monitoring framework. Specifically, the tables include the indicators from Substat 24-2, which were assessed by Substat, together with new proposals which also were assessed through a scientific and technical review against the criteria as headline, component, or complementary indicators. The expert workshop was instrumental in supporting the assessment of the headline indicators. The assessment for indicators to be included at the component or complementary level was conducted on the basis of the criteria in the recommendations, the comments received, and technical and specific review complete by the Secretariat with the support of UNEP WCMC. In Annex 1, under 9B, includes two tables. The first table is a list of headline indicators with a subtable on binary, yes/no indicators, which could be collected through national reports and aggregated for global review. Table 2 includes an integrated list of headline and binary indicators and component and complementary indicators. That table can serve as a practical reference to delegates while considering goals and targets here in this meeting on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much, co-chairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benitez. I see a request for the floor from Panama. Panama, there will be opportunity to discuss later. Is that a true request, or I cannot see you? Can the floor be given to Panama? All right, so let's move on then. I would like now to give the floor to the chair of SPI, Ms. Charlotta Sökvist of Sweden. Ms. Sökvist, the floor, is this Panama? So Charlotta, if you bear with us for a second, I will now give the floor to Panama. Panama, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding the streamlined text. As before we continue, I would like to clarify some clarification, and I speak on behalf of the Blue Leaders countries, which is a group of more than 21 countries, and I would just want to say we commend the work of the informal group and agree to move forward with some of the elements of the streamlined text. However,
Panama, we will be discussing that under agenda item 4. So if you bear with us, we will...
I could bear with you guys. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Sökvist, can the floor be given to the chair of SBI, Charlotta Sökvist? Charlotta?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Distinguished delegates, at this third meeting, the subsidiary board on implementation requested intersessional work to be conducted for a few items that will be considered by COP15. I am happy to provide a brief report on two elements of this work of particular relevance to the open-ended working group, and these are work on enhanced planning, reporting and review mechanism, and work on resource mobilization. Concerning the first of these, in recommendation 3/11, SBI 3 proposed a draft COP decision on enhanced planning, reporting and review mechanism, in which some key elements will be included in 4 annexes: Annex 1 on MBSAP guidance, Annex 2 on guidance and template for national reporting, Annex 3 on non-state actor commitments, and Annex 4 on a proposed modus operandi for an SBI open-ended forum. Prior to the second part of SBI 3, draft these has been made available for comments through notification 2022-001. There was insufficient time during the meeting to review these annexes in detail, and therefore, in its recommendation, the SBI requested that the peer review of the annexes be extended to collect further views from parties and observers. Accordingly, the Executive Secretary extended the peer review to 7 May 2022 in notification 2022-018. Comments were provided by 24 parties and 12 observers, and in addition, the Secretariat organized a workshop in Nairobi prior to Working Group 2002-4 to provide an opportunity to share views and discuss the annexes. Based on further analysis by the Secretariat, including on how to minimize the reporting burden on countries when reporting on the relationship between national targets and the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, harmonization between the draft guidance for revising or updating national biodiversity strategies and action plans, MBSAPs, and the draft template for national reporting, the operationalization of a national reporting template in the online reporting tool, and views expressed by parties during the formal meetings and in the peer review. The Secretariat prepared the revised annexes appended to the draft decision and the item 4 of COP15 contained in the compilation of the draft decisions for COP in CBD COP 15/2. Distinguished delegates, concerning resource mobilization, SBI 3 mandated the co-chairs of the SBI 3 contact group on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism to facilitate an informal consultative process on resource mobilization under my guidance and in consultation with the Bureau and the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. The objective of these consultations was to enhance mutual understanding of the issues at hand and of expectations by the parties, and to explore opportunities for convergence. In my report to you on the first round of these informal consultations, at the 4th meeting of the open-ended working group in Nairobi, I noted with pleasure that some convergence have been achieved on how to possibly address the successor to the strategy for resource mobilization, but I also noted the need to continue the discussion on a number of other issues. And these issues were reflected in detail in the preliminary report of the co-chairs for SBI contact group on the informal consultation, which was made available for information to the 4th meeting of the working group. Accordingly, a second round of informal consultation was held on the 19th and 20th October 2022. Based on the issues identified for further consultations in the preliminary report of the co-chairs, this second round of informal consultation focused on the concepts reflected in the section entitled Additional Elements on Resource Mobilization of SBI 3 recommendation. As with the first round of informal consultations, the co-chairs of SBI 3 contact group, Ms. Ines Verley of Belgium and Ms. Shonisani Munshedzi of South Africa, prepared a background note with organized the discussion during the 2 sessions of a second round in the form of areas of focus and questions. Parties had a rich and nuanced dialogue on these questions, and I note a constructive and open atmosphere among parties. Having said this, the issues reflected in the questions remain complex, and parties express a broad range of views on how to address them. Based on what they heard, the co-chairs of a contact group identified a number of possible avenues toward mutually agreeable solutions of the key contentious issues and embarked on testing and refining these options through an iterative process with individual parties or smaller groups. And as I talk, a third round of consultation is still ongoing, and the outcome of both the second and the third round will be reflected in a final report of the co-chairs, which will be made available just in time for COP15 Part 2 for its consideration. I also would like to express my appreciation to the two co-chairs of SBI Free Contact Group and to all the parties that engage actively and constructively in the dialogue. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that we cannot expect miracles of this informal process, and I anticipate further long and complicated discussions at the COP. In closing, let me note that the mandate of these informal consultations formally address the SBI-free recommendation, and in particular the draft decision on resource mobilization contained therein. However, the concept reflected in the section entitled Additional Elements on Resource Mobilization, which were considered during the second round of informal consultations, are also reflected in Target 19.1 of the draft Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and making progress on these additional elements will therefore have a positive impact on the further negotiations of this important target. It is therefore my hope that these informal consultations and the ongoing work of the co-chairs of SBI Free Contact Group will provide a good basis for the further negotiations at COP15, both on the draft decision on resource mobilization and on the relevant elements of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Charlotta, for this report. We will now move to the next item on our agenda. Francis, over to you. Oh, it's me, it's still. Okay, sorry about that. I'm still for this one. Let's us now turn our attention to the focus of our work, starting with agenda item 4 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Under agenda item 4, the working group is expected to complete the development of a final draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for consideration and adoption by the Conference of the Parties at the second part of the 15 meetings, which will begin in just 4 days from now. Under the previous agenda item, we presented a report of the work done of the informal group. The outcome of the work of the informal groups are provided in document CBD Working Group 2020-05, which contain the technical observation and analysis of the text from the fourth meeting of the working group and a proposed streamlined text applying the technical observation and analysis. In view of the very limited time available and the urgency to facilitate efficient negotiation at this meeting, my co-chair and I propose that the working group use the outcome of the informal group, including the technical rationale section and the suggested streamlined version of the framework, as the working basis for its deliberation. The use of the text coming from the informal groups will be without prejudice to the right of parties to propose change to the text, which can include bringing back some elements of the text resulting from the fourth meeting of the working group. My co-chair and I strongly believe that the use of the text of the informal group as our working basis provide the only realistic chance for us to finalize the framework for consideration by the Conference of the Parties. Dear delegates, there is no more time left to move back and forth. This is the last meeting of the working group. The eyes of the world are on us. My co-chair and I therefore call for unity, flexibility, and a spirit of compromise among you, the delegates, to bring this work to a successful closure. Do I see any objection to the proposed way forward? I see a request for the floor from Panama, followed by Bolivia. Panama, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the clarification. So before we continue, like I said, as Panama is a blue leader, and we commend the work of the informal group and agree to move forward with many of the elements of the streamlined text. However, some elements on quality in Target 3 especially are critically, and I say again, it's critical importance to us and to many coastal and island states, are not included in the text from September. Our language was removed after spending more than 10 hours discussing this target in Nairobi. Could the chair please clarify when in the proposed organization of work of the open-ended working group will we have the opportunity to address this target 3? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Panama. Let us hear from Russian Federation, from Bolivia, followed by Russian Federation. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Co-chair. So on behalf of the Bolivian state, in an open letter to the countries of the world, expressed its concerns about forming an informal group of negotiators with a limited number of participants and regions to work on the final document in Nairobi. And this gave rise to a selective process. And the convention calls for an inclusive and participatory process pushed forward by signatories, and the process needs to capture all of the many different perspectives to live in harmony with nature. And I have some substantive arguments to voice on behalf of my delegation. So we have the report of the informal group that has captured initiatives coming from the Eurocentric and anthropocentric point of view, as opposed to the cosmocentric proponents based on Mother Earth, and therefore introduce concepts related with such a paradigm, which are solutions based on nature, valuing the economic aspect of nature, and then payment for ecosystem services. But at the same time, there's other concepts have been omitted, in particular those that derive from the non-Western vision of the world and non-anthropocentric. They have eliminated concept focuses on cosmo-biocentric of the indigenous people and that of Mother Earth, and action centered on Mother Earth. And that type of elimination has been systematic throughout the text. And we have not been left with any reference on the rights of Mother Earth. And we understand that this editing task should not eliminate any fundamental and substantive position of countries. We have, therefore, we wanted a text that was plural and representative. We wanted balance, pluralism. And in this context, we cannot fully support this text as the basis for negotiations in its current format. We believe it is time to listen from the Secretary General of the United Nations, which is to give space to the non-anthropocentric
positions, and we wonder when this will happen. So in a framework of this framework, Bolivia can only work on this text only if all the references to Mother Earth and the rights of Mother Earth and the acts centered on Mother Earth are reinserted in the respective paragraphs where they were eliminated from in the Nairobi text. Similarly, if these are introduced in a holistic way, the considerations of the rights of Mother Earth as one of the fundamental principles of the global framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia. Let's hear from the Russian Federation. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We have a long list of similar concerns, those that were already raised by our colleagues from Panama and Bolivia. We took a look at the proposed organization of work for this meeting, and where we will consider all aspects of the biodiversity framework. And the basis will be this text developed by a limited group in which, in particular, our interests were not presented in any way. For us, this will be difficult because this means that this text is going to move on to the COP, and we can't even discuss all of these issues here. At the same time, we're of the view that the informal group did a significant amount of work, and I can openly say that many of the elements that were prepared by the informal group are positive and clearly aimed at streamlining the text, which I think that we and many other delegations can use in our work this week, as well as in the following 2 weeks. We believe that we should be based on the official text that we have and not on an unofficial text. At the same time, of course, we must fully use those elements, developments, and proposals on specific chapters of the framework document and the specific elements that were developed by the informal group. And we are ready to work constructively within that framework using these elements. But it will be difficult for us to adopt this text that was developed by a limited informal group as the basis that will be the basis for what we will move on to submit to the COP. Unfortunately for us, this is an unacceptable option. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. We will now hear from Nigeria, followed by the Democratic Republic of Congo. Nigeria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Nigeria would like to share similar concern as Panama. Chair, if you may recall, in Geneva and Nairobi, Nigeria repeatedly raised the issue of the quality of protection in Target 3. We find it surprising that the Chair wishes to proceed with a streamlined text developed by few countries that says nothing about this fundamental issue. We were not invited to participate in the discussions leading to this streamlined text, and our views and those of others on these issues are not reflected. Nigeria remains concerned that, absent of clear language that specifies the quality of protection count towards the 30% target, we will end up with 30% of ocean in paper packs, lacking meaningful protection. That result will do little or nothing to halt the dramatic declines in ocean health and resilience. that threatens the food security and livelihood of billions of people. So we would like to request the co-chair to revisit this inclusion of the quality of protection in Target 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigeria. Let's move to DRC,
Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor. Thank you, co-chairs, for giving me the floor. The Democratic Republic of Congo welcomes and thanks the Secretariat for having held this 5th meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Also, we express our gratitude to the Government of Canada for having accepted to host this meeting, and we thank China for their work, as well as we thank the co-chairs for their work. The DRC, in general, is pleased by the work done by the informal group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework so as to ensure that work moves forward. We are of the view that parties will not add new concepts and new parts that have yet to be negotiated to date. Co-chairs, if you remember, after 4 years of developments and negotiations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, no consensus has been reached, to the great disappointment of the world that is watching us and our inability to agree after 4 meetings that have been organized in Nairobi, passing by Rome and Geneva. Montreal is the only opportunity we have to catch up and make progress in the face of the concerns of current and future generations. Their future is hangs in the balance of the end of this 5th meeting, and we hope that we will reach a harmonized global framework that is ambitious, realistic, and balanced. One that is based on the goodwill of all stakeholders. The DRC is extremely concerned by a lack of will to ensure a post-2020 global biodiversity framework and would like to know from the co-chairs, what should we do if after this 5th meeting we have yet reached compromise and consensus on this framework? In conclusion, the DRC remains confident that with the collective awareness from all those present today, solutions will be reached so as to achieve consensus on restoring degraded ecosystems, the 30 for 30, as well as an appropriate solution on the just and equitable sharing of the benefits of genetic resources, as well as the consensus on the digital sequence information on genetic resources. And we must have a monitoring mechanism implemented as well as a framework for resource mobilization, as well as ensuring a framework for technology transfer. In particular, the availability of funds that will allow for national plans of action and strategies for biodiversity. I thank you.
Merci.
I thank the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think you were exactly on the dot at 3 minutes.
Turn now to Senegal, followed by the United Kingdom. Le Sénégal, vous avez la parole.
Senegal, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. Senegal would just like to add to what has just been said by Panama and also by Nigeria. Protection is essential, and we don't see that trajectory reflected in the text. It doesn't need to reflect all the prior discussions that we've had. There are important concepts upon which many parties had agreed for example, during the highly and fully and strictly protected and the ecosystem services which are absent. So we would like to come back to these texts so that we can then move forward.
Merci. Le Sénégal,
Thank you, Senegal.
you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. The United Kingdom was not part of the informal group meeting which met in September. We're very grateful to all of our colleagues from around the world who did take part in that meeting. The United Kingdom does not agree with every recommendation that the informal group has made. There are parts of the text that we've been arguing for some years that aren't reflected in the outcomes of the informal group discussions. But the United Kingdom understands that we are not being asked at this point to accept every recommendation from the informal group. We're being asked to use the output of the informal group process as the basis, the starting point for our negotiations today. And if I understood the co-chair correctly a little earlier, his point was that using the informal group output as a starting point will be without prejudice to those issues, those sections, those wordings which are not currently in the text and which parties have argued and are currently asking to be reintroduced. Indeed, some of the proposals that I've just heard suggested for reintroduction, I will support, my delegation will support when they come to the floor. But echoing some of the comments that have also been made, we have very little time. The output of the text from Nairobi was not tractable. It was not a helpful basis on which to move forward quickly in the 3 days that we have. We think that the informal group document is that document, and we'd like to suggest that we move forward on that basis, on the understanding, as the co-chair has already explained, that it's without prejudice to the ability of parties to reintroduce text which they feel is important to them. Thank you, co-chair.
Thank you. We will now hear from Indonesia, followed by Switzerland. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Chair, we want to thank the informal group for their work in preparing and report documents CBD-Post 2020-OM 2022-1-2. We feel that their technical observations on the goals and target of the framework is important to advance our discussions, particularly the two streamlined versions of the draft post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as appear in Annexes 1 and 2 of the report. Indonesia is largely supportive to the streamlined versions in Annex 2 as it provides greater flexibility and a more balanced approach. We strongly encourage all parties and stakeholders to use the streamlined text in Annex 2 as a basis for our negotiation. Indonesia emphasized the importance of monitoring and evaluating the achievement of targets that are tailored to the needs, capabilities, and conditions of each country. Indonesia further viewed the GBF as a collective global aspirational goal, and therefore it should not be attributed specific obligation to individual parties. Parties should work together on a voluntary basis to implement the framework in a socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable manner. We recognize the effort made by several countries to set their target 30 by 30 to support the framework's collective goals. Indonesia will contribute to achieving these goals and target according to our national circumstances, socio-economic conditions, and capabilities. In this regard, we could not agree with the inclusions of numerical value in target of the framework. We have specific concerns about the inclusion of the eliminations of harmful subsidies amounting to $500 billion, which should not be part of the financial commitment in Target 19.1. We strongly request all parties and stakeholders to commit to more ambitious effort in securing a proper means of implementations and resource mobilization to accelerate the financial flows to the developing and least developed countries. In relation to the track in relation to the draft text proposed, we also have concerns with the inclusions of some new terms and definitions as further references in the document CBD-WG2020-05/4 on the updated glossary for the draft post-2020 GBF. We think that the term environmentally harmful incentive, positive incentive, sea use change, and fisheries, among others, are problematic as there is no internationally agreed definitions. We believe that the inclusion of these terms in the glossary will broaden the gap in our discussions in the relevant text of the framework. And therefore, we request the meeting to revisit the inclusion of this term in the glossary and refrain from adding any new ideas that would hinder our progress of the discussions. Despite these challenges in the text, Indonesia is committed to working together with all parties and stakeholders to reach a consensus and produce a balanced and pragmatic text of the framework that can set us on the path toward achieving the 2050 visions of living in harmony with nature. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, there will be time to get into the substance when we get to contact group and each individual targets. So I'll ask you in your intervention to focus on the substance of the discussion, which is around how we're going to be using that text, and refrain from making long comments on specific issues. The time to do that will come. You'll all have an opportunity. And as several of you have said, when we talk about the use of the informal group text, it is without any prejudice to your privilege to introduce change. So let it be clear. We have a long list. Let's resume that. Let's go first to Switzerland, followed by Eswatini. La Confédération Suisse, vous avez la parole.
Swiss Confederation, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I would like to thank Canada and Quebec for their warm hospitality in hosting us for this working group meeting and afterwards for the COP.
To the different interventions, I would like to fully support what has been said very clearly by the distinguished delegate from UK, but also by the delegate from Indonesia. We think it is important that we start the work as quickly as possible, and that we do so in a constructive and solution-oriented manner. And we do believe that the Montreal text is indeed a good basis for that. It's not a perfect basis. There are many questions still open, and as you have said, as a colleague from UK has said, many of us will have some specific elements that we will have to add in order to find consensus, to find a solution for a robust outcome to be adopted in 2 weeks from now. So we think by taking that text as a starting point, that does not prejudge any of the positions, that does not prevent us to find the consensus, as also the Democratic Republic of Congo has said very clearly, we need to move to consensus, we need to do so very fast, and we can only do that by taking that text as a basis, by bringing in the elements that are still missing, and through that finding a text, working towards a text that we can all adopt proudly in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. Let's move to Eswatini, followed by China. Eswatini, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Eswatini recognizes the great work that has been done by the group in some part of the text. However, we wish to agree with Nigeria and further emphasize that as much as this is a document that is on our table, it is not a document of the parties, and we consider it that it can only serve as a document to inform negotiations here and also be open for further inputs. In this approach, we consider that the parties should reserve the right to ensure that no critical elements of the OEWG4 text was excluded from the AIG text. With this understanding, we wish to indicate ahead of the negotiations that the views of Eswatini and other African countries on Section BBs were not integrated or were rather ignored during OEWG4 and not incorporated in the outcomes. We request an opportunity to submit our proposals that were omitted, and in addition, we note that some parts of the text of the IG made strong proposals to remove certain aspects of the OEWG text without an understanding that such will be or has already been included in some parts of the text. A clear example is the proposal of the removal of section I, for which it should be included in section B bis, which has not been discussed at all in OEWG 4. It is not clear what informs such strong proposals without the opportunity to discuss its context, and we therefore call for the reinsertion of such sections, and we are open to further discussions provided that an opportunity to bring back missing text would be provided, especially text that was not discussed in OEWG 4, which is not clear what informed certain recommendations about it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Eswatini. Let's give the floor to China, followed by Mexico. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Chinese delegation thanks the government of Canada and the government of Quebec and the city of Montreal for the warm hospitality, and thank the Secretariat for the work done for this session. China, as the presidency of the COP, we would like to welcome all the delegations to the OEWG and COP, moving from Kunming to Montreal. We also thank the efforts by the co-chairs for the text. In the view of this delegation, after listening to all the interventions of other delegations, we are of the view that we are moving in the same direction. That is to say we would like to advance the negotiation process as soon as possible so that we can achieve the consensual goals. In particular, according to the introductions by the co-chairs as well as the interventions by some delegations, they have made it very clear that currently the text under discussion as a basis is not to say that we are precluding other concerns or interests in this regard. In our long march towards the ultimate goal, after the leadership of the co-chairs, we have already put aside some of the contents that are in duplication, but we are not against putting these elements back into the context. I think now we have a very good consensual basis. It is true that we are pressed for time. We do not have the luxury of more time to returning to previous bases, and that is why for the Secretariat, for the co-chairs and other parties, we have made this decision in an open and transparent manner. The message is that by establishing an informal working group, we are trying to move along this document, this text. I believe now we have the same idea and the same aspiration, that is to move this process ahead and to achieve our common goal. Therefore, in this regard, it is my hope that countries with reservations previously would have another consideration, would think twice. We are not excluding any concerns by any parties. We know a negotiation process is a negotiation process that is open, and we're also open to further discussions to address the concerns of all parties. Therefore, again, as the President, as the Chinese delegation, we hope that all parties can show flexibility so that we can work against time, so that we can find an effective manner to advance the process as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, China. You're providing collectively us with a lot of useful information. what I would propose is we have a long list in front of us. Let's hear a few more intervention, 3 more intervention, and then I'll propose a summary of what we hear and a way forward, and we'll take it from there. So let's hear from Mexico, followed by Australia. Mexico, you have the floor. Can the floor be given to Mexico? Yeah. Okay, so technician, can you?
Yes. Thank you. Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. And thank you for being in this space with the 3 countries. So there was an informal text that was established, which is based on the original text, and it's not abandoning what was done in Nairobi. We don't have much time, and we want to advance with a compromise in order to have a global framework. We've had internal discussions in each of our regions in order to feed into these meetings to reach compromises and bring together the different visions. And that is how we did this in the informal group. There were certain eliminations, but this is a starting point with a simplified, cleaner text, which will facilitate the integration of other parts that people believe have been excluded. Respectfully, Mexico urges the parties to move ahead in the discussions to take into account these concerns. It's not perfect, but it can be perfected. We need to harness this time remaining so that we can fulfill our mandate and bring these results to the COP. We're up against the clock, as has been mentioned by China. It is a priority to take up this urgent request from civilization and from ecological civilization for the whole of life on the planet. Mexico supports us taking this text as the basis, respectively integrating, not excluding, the visions expressed by all parties. Thank you.
Gracias, Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mexico.
From Australia, and then I'll try to do a summary. Can the floor be given to Australia, please?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I will be quick. Australia was not part of the informal group, but we wish to express support for using the informal group text as the basis for the negotiations at Open-Ended Working Group 5. Not all of Australia's preferences were picked up by the informal group, but we have looked really hard at the text and believe it is a good basis for our discussions. Australia believes this is the time where all parties must compromise and be flexible so that we can be in a position to adopt the GBF at COP15. As other colleagues have said, using the informal text does not prevent parties from suggesting proposals to improve the text, and we welcome those discussions on those proposals in the contact groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. Colleagues, we heard basically we've heard a number of parties supporting and thanking the informal group for their work. And basically, what we heard is that there was a desire to be able to use the text as it facilitated the discussion. There was very clearly a desire to be able to introduce change where parties feel it is important. And that should be very clear. The intention is not to block any parties from introducing change that they feel important. When the time comes to get through the discussion, obviously there will be opportunities, and I think everybody values and wants to have the opportunity to hear parties' introduction. What we will ensure is that it is very clear to the contact group that the informal group is a resource to help streamline the text. And that the discussion will need to be taken target by target, section by section in the text to enable to get to this consensus we're looking for. So I have heard a lot of openness and willingness to engage into those discussions, and I heard many of you pointing to the need to move expediently. So with that in mind, in the spirit of cooperation and the need to move expediently, will you be willing forward to go along with us in that direction? All right. With this in mind, we can move forward. So the contact group will be moving forward with the information of this text. Thank you very much. I see Panama requesting the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, we recognize the desire to move forward and to the substantive discussion. And Panama, it's fine in moving forward with the streamlined text, assuming that we have the opportunity to add the text, especially in Target 3 that I was saying in the beginning of my intervention. But for us, it's unclear when in the contact groups the Target 3 will be discussed. And the other thing we do want to say is that we are a bit worried that it's going to get even worse than the text from Nairobi, because the parties are going to add the text that they put in Nairobi, and maybe even more text to a streamlined text. So that's our worriness, but we are okay with moving forward. We just want to know exactly when we will have the opportunity to discuss especially Target 3.
Thank you, Panama, and thank you for your understanding and your support. Even if I'm a little bit surprised that we can do worse than the text of Nairobi. But let me assure you that there will be opportunity to discuss all the targets. We have 3 days, and as you know, in the scenario note, we've tried to prioritize the work of the contact group. We're not limiting the work of the contact group, and there will be opportunity. There is no desire to exclude anything from the agenda. It's going to be a matter of the time available, how fast you're going to be moving through that. And how we're going to be doing that. But let me assure you, no targets will be excluded. It's just a matter of scheduling and what we can do within 3 days or not. Okay, I see you nodding. Thank you very much. Russian Federation, you're asking for the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We listened to the statements made by different countries, and we can understand the task before us. Unfortunately, we still have the same concerns, including those that were just mentioned by Panama. We're of the view that if we work with the new text and then everyone adds what they want to it, then we'll end up with a text that's possibly worse than that in Nairobi. We continue to believe that the only basis for our work this week will be the official text. However, we will not reject, and in some cases, we would welcome the use of the language in the text by the informal group. But considering every item in those contact groups, then countries will be able to propose language from the informal group, and then we can consider whether it's relevant or not. I once again wish to note that in this, there are at least 4 targets that we don't see in this proposed organization of work. What are we doing with them? Are they simply going to be maintained as is in the text that the informal group proposed? Is this what we're going to be submitting to the COP? We cannot accept this way forward, and therefore we cannot accept the proposal to use the text of the informal group as the basis. We only will base our work on the official text, but however, we will support the use of some of the language or technical clarifications that were made by the informal group. They did a significant amount of work, and once again, I wish to repeat that many of the elements are very positive in nature. And this is true in both the section on goals and targets, and we are ready to find a compromise in this area, but perhaps under a different proposal of work, putting the official text first and forward, and then we can add elements or proposals from the work of the informal group. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation, for your compliment on the quality of the work of the informal group and on your understanding for the need to move forward. So with that in mind, we will be continuing with the contact group. We'll be considering the work of the informal group, and you will have opportunity where you see fit to introduce some change. So with that in mind, can we close this item and move forward? Thank you very much, distinguished. And we're now turning Russia, we do recognize your concern, and it will be duly noted in the report. But in the spirit of collaboration and then moving forward, can we move forward? Russia, you have the floor.
Спасибо.
Thank you, and I apologize, co-chairs, for once again I'm pressing my button, but I don't quite understand fully what you explained. I want to clearly understand what document is going to be considered within the working group, what text will be on the screen for the working group, and once again I want to repeat that we can only start our work with the official text. If in parallel there will be the use of the informal group's text, then this is acceptable and proposals from it can be made, but we want to make sure that the basis of our work is on the official text. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair. You'll also have to add maybe after we give some views on what Russia has just said. I think in life, there is something you call missing an opportunity. Opportunity presents itself, and then we let it go. The IG text, which we have strongly recommended to be used in the contact group, gives us an opportunity to see whether there are elements in the Nairobi text which needs to be brought back there to strengthen it. That is the spirit going forward. It is not the other way around, that we go in the contact group with the Nairobi text. Dear delegates, any one of you that has seen the Nairobi text, if we go to the contact group with the Nairobi text, I can foresee that we shall walk out of this place empty-handed. There's nothing we'll get out of this meeting. And also that will mean it will translate into COP. After 4 years, we already lost 2 years. Now, again, there's opportunity to lose more time. So the IG text, all that group did was not even to develop their own text. They did not develop their own text. What they did, we have said it, we have repeated it. They helped to streamline a huge text into something a bit smaller to facilitate discussion. They didn't have their own text. It was our own text from Nairobi, which we also could not move us forward. We've heard here, we've heard you, most of you are saying, you are worried this might not be considered, this is left out, this is, and we've said it from the beginning, that that text does not exclude, does not prevent you from bringing back the Nairobi text to enrich it. But we're also saying, do not turn that opportunity into opportunity to make it more of a Christmas tree, because then we don't move forward. So, we've spent a lot of energy in this work. Today cannot be the time that we stop the process which all of us are thinking is nearing its conclusion. 3 days. We've already taken here how many hours? And we thought we would be in contact groups. We haven't moved. When are we moving forward? So I think with all the views being expressed about what that group did not negotiate. They did not. If you were there. They worked up to sometimes 3 a.m. We told them, put off your negotiation hats. They did. So what is causing all this problem? If we cannot use this text, it simply means we don't need the framework. I think so. 4 years, and we are almost at the point of finishing it, and then we are stalling. So my request to you, the Russian Federation and others, please give the IG text a chance to move this process forward. UK and others have explained that this is only a basis for negotiation. We have said it. It doesn't exclude. But if you just bring a Nairobi text, like look at target 3 or other data, put it on the screen here and look at it and take it to a contact group, what are you going to get there? You can't move. So if you don't want to move in this meeting, it is your decision as parties. But our recommendation to you as co-chairs, that we've been through this process for long, and time has come for those 3 things we mentioned: unity, flexibility, compromise. Aware of the time which is lost, aware we have not left anybody behind. For 4 years, you have all been part of this process. Look at the IG text. You will find, before they have proposed that text, they explain why they're even proposing that. Read it. Do you disagree with the explanation? Fine. Then you can bring something from the Nairobi text to enrich this one. So this is it, dear delegates. Let's move. Let's move. Time is not on our side. They say time is of essence, and we are missing that opportunity. Co-chair.
I have a very eloquent co-chair. We're lucky. I see 2 requests from the floor, so let's hear those. Brazil followed by Namibia. So can the floor be given to Brazil, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, would it be possible to give us 5 minutes, suspend the meeting for 5 minutes to try to find a way out? I think with more informally, may you try to get easier than giving the floor to different delegates. We will continue this for a long time. It's a suggestion to stop the clock 5 minutes, just try to get a solution for this. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very useful suggestion. So perhaps I can ask the delegation that wanna engage into that discussion. You want to gather in the corner there, or do you need just time to move around? Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break. I am going to start my clock here, and then we'll resume in 5 minutes. It's starting now. Distinguished delegates, can I ask you to take your seats? Please take your seat. We're going to be resuming. So, colleagues, there was lots of useful conversation, and you clearly demonstrated the spirit of compromise, openness, and good listening skills. And I understand that through facilitation from several delegations, including Brazil and China, a compromise was crafted. And I will try to describe that compromise to you. And I'll ask my colleague from Brazil to help me if I'm not very clear in my explanation. The issue is that we have an official text, which is the Nairobi text. And that text is the one that was negotiated. We have an unofficial text, which is the text created by the informal group. The compromise will that the contact group will be showing side by side on the screen, or perhaps on two screens when technically feasible, the two texts. So delegates will see on one side the Nairobi text in all its glory, and we'll see on the other side the text from the informal group. And then they can start the discussion considering both. So that will satisfy those delegations that want to ensure that the Nairobi text do not lose its official status, but will enable also those that want to have the informal group text available as an important and fundamental input into the discussion. So is that compromise acceptable to all? Thank you. I still see two requests for the floor, so I hope they will be explaining strong support for the compromise. Let's hear from Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was pressing pretty fast on my button. I would like just to highlight that that was not what was discussed in the huddle that we had there in front of the podium. I would like just to underline that, because we do not believe that this is a good way forward. We very much agreed with what your co-chair has outlined. We are here at the moment where we risk to lose the possible momentum. We do not think that is the right way forward, but we will. That's just I would like to make that very clear, and we would also like to underline that is not what we're discussing in the huddle. Thank you very much. Namibia.
Can the floor be given to Namibia, please?
Thank you, Co-Chair. You know, we agreed that we'd be guided by science, and mathematics is the most precise of the sciences. We had a small group of people work for 60 hours to come up with the informal group text. We have collectively 27 hours of negotiating time, of which we've now spent 2. We can go along with the compromise that you propose, although, like Switzerland, that was not what we heard in the huddle. But the first question that should be asked when the two texts are displayed together is, can we please work with the text from the informal group? Because although it has only half the brackets of the Nairobi text, it still has half the brackets of the Nairobi text to resolve. And if we're going to get into a situation where everything that the informal group removed from the Nairobi text is now being brought back as a starting point, I completely agree with you and your co-chair that there's absolutely no way that we will finish this work in the 3 days allowed to us, and probably not in the 2 weeks that we have at the COP. So I would very strongly appeal to colleagues and urge the co-leads of the contact groups to please do that as a first step. Put up the 2 texts and then see if we can drop the one from Nairobi, except of course for those issues that people really can't let go. But for that there's a safeguard in negotiations. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Appeal to colleagues to please be very restrained in what you bring back into the informal group text, and let's please get on with it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Namibia. And let us be very clear. The objective is, as you said, Namibia, is to simplify the text further and make it shorter and further reduce. Let's remember that there is still 900 brackets in that text, and the objective is to significantly reduce that further, not to increase it. So, with that explanation, Switzerland, can I ask you to see if you're willing to go along with the compromise?
Just to be very clear, I was not saying that I could not live with it. I just wanted to underline that this was not agreed and discussed in the huddle, and that is a very bad starting point. And we think we should not concede to those who seem not willing to move forward, but I was not objecting to that proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your understanding, and we will make sure that huddles are better define and include all the necessary people. There was, I think, 2 huddles happening at the same time. Okay, with this in mind, we're going to be moving forward with this compromise, and we can move to the next step. Thank you, distinguished delegate, for your comments. We are now turning to the draft decision to operationalize the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Allow me to remind you that during the 4th meeting of the working group, it was requested that participants be given an opportunity to provide written comments on this draft decision. In the light of this request, parties, other governments, and observers were invited through notification 2022-43 to provide written comments on document CBD Working Group 2020-4L2. There were 13 submissions from parties and 12 submissions from observers. And all submissions received have been compiled and made available on the CBD website. Given the limited time we have and the range of divergent comments received, Francis and I are of the view that this working group will not be able to make any meaningful progress on the draft decision until the negotiation on substantive part of the post-2020 GBF has progressed further. For this reason, Francis and I recommend that this matter be sent to the COP for consideration, taking into account the submission made and the progress to be made on the negotiation of the framework. Distinguished delegates, at the closure of the 4th meeting of the working group, the various parts of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework were at different stage of development. Some parts have been reviewed in depth, others partially discussed, and some not discussed at all, as you mentioned. In order to advance all parts of the framework equally for the final draft, to maximize the efficiency of the utilization of time available to us, which is very short, and to facilitate negotiation, we have asked that the meeting be focused as follows. First, section of the framework that were not fully negotiated at previous meeting of the working group. that includes A, B, BBS as you mentioned, I, D, E, H, and K. Also, remaining brackets in the section goals and targets which may be resolved through further exchange of views and compromise solution, prioritizing those that are not directly dependent on COP consideration of draft decision recommended by the two subsidiary bodies, and those with high potential for resolution. Proposal of new targets that are noted in the report of the fourth meeting of the working group. Parties and stakeholders are therefore encouraged to focus on resolving area of divergence, aiming for compromise text with concise language, and to refrain from adding any new ideas that would hinder producing a text of the framework that could be presented to the COP in a form that facilitates its finalization and adoption. To the extent possible, the co-chairs and the co-leads will make every effort to find time to further consideration of a few targets, including those related to resource mobilization, that are not indicated in the preliminary schedule of the work of the working group. So we're trying to address your point there. I will now pass the floor for the next agenda item. Francis, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair. Dear delegates, at this meeting we will establish the same set of contact groups that were used at the fourth meeting of the working group in terms of co-leads and focus, with some modifications as may be needed or as necessary. Now, contact group 1 may wish to focus on goals A, B, and C of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The co-leads will be Mr. Gao Ziyang of China, replacing Mr. Binod Mathur of India, and the other co-chair is Nobe Balusho of Switzerland. The group will meet for the first time, and take note of this, on Monday, 5th December, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Contact group 2 may wish to focus on targets 1, 4, 5, and 6, but as we are saying, all targets are going to be looked at in this meeting, but this is just preliminary way of trying. We shall give opportunity to look at all of them. So contact group 2 may wish to focus on targets 1, 4, 5, and 6 on reducing threats to biodiversity. So the co-leads are Ms. Tiona Kachava of Georgia and Ms. Rosemary Patterson of New Zealand. The group will meet for the first time on Sunday, 4th December, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Contact group 3 may wish to focus on targets 9, 10, and 11, and this deals with the meeting needs of people through sustainable use and benefit sharing. The co-leads will be Ms. Gillian Guthrie of Jamaica and Ms. Gabrielle Obamaya from Austria. The group will meet for the first time on Monday, 5th December, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Contact group 4 may wish to focus on targets 14 to 16 and 17, 20, 21, 22, and new targets. And this is on tools and solutions for implementation and mainstreaming. The co-leads will be Ms. Ann Taylor of European Union and Mr. Jorge Murillo of Colombia. The group will meet for the first time this afternoon from 3 to 6 p.m. It will meet at the Nahani room 230B. Contact group 6 may wish to focus on sections A, B, BBs, and D, sections E, H, I, and K. Ms. Carolina Caceres of Canada and Ms. Marimay Muzungaile of Seychelles are the co-leads. The group will meet for the first time today, if time allows, immediately following the closure of this plenary until 1 p.m. Again, they will meet from 3 to 6 p.m. and again from 7:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. to focus on sections A, B, B, C, D, and I. It will meet in St. John Room 210E. In addition, if need arises, we may establish friends of the co-chairs groups to be able to address issues where we are having challenges arriving at consensus. Dear delegates, let me say some few words about the operation of the contact group. The contact groups are open to participation by all parties, other governments, and representatives of observers will also be able to participate unless decided otherwise by the co-leads. The usual practice and rules will apply to participation of observers. They may speak at the discretion of the co-leads and given the floor after parties have spoken. Any substantive proposals from an observer must be supported by at least one party. Contact groups will be encouraged to establish time limits, that is between 45 minutes to 1 hour, for discussion of each section, goal, or target. If those discussions cannot be finalized within the allocated time, the co-leads may establish a group of friends of co-leads to address specific technical issues or request the working group co-chairs to propose a way forward. Contact group sessions will last up to 3 hours. Up to 3 sessions of each contact group can be scheduled per day. Meeting times are from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., and from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. A maximum of 2 contact groups will be held in parallel, starting today. However, no contact groups will be held in parallel to a plenary session. As per the usual practice, these sessions of the contact groups cannot be recorded or shared through social media. The contact groups will work in English, and accordingly, non-papers considered at the meetings of the groups are also in English. As per usual practice, the outcomes of the work of the contact groups will be reported back to the plenary. In order to facilitate the deliberations of the contact group, co-leads may invite the members of the informal group to clarify technical issues as necessary. Co-chairs or co-leads may also decide to convene other types of informal groups, such as friends of the co-chairs or friends of the co-leads groups, to advance their work on certain issues. Meeting of such groups may be held in parallel with each other and in parallel with the contact groups as appropriate, while taking into account the constraints of small delegations. As per usual practice, the statement upload is not to be used during contact groups. All interventions during contact groups are to be made in the room. I trust that there are no objections to the proposed way forward. We urge all parties and stakeholders to make the best use of their time during the contact groups. For those contact groups that will start after tomorrow, we would like to encourage all the respective co-leads to undertake informal consultations with the relevant parties to address any key areas of divergence and identify compromise text. We thank all the co-leads for joining us at this meeting and supporting our work. We again count on your hard work. leadership, and dedicated efforts. Distinguished delegates, let us now turn to agenda item 5 on DSI. Over to you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Francis. Colleagues, we have 45 minutes in front of us, so I will ask all to be brief in their reports, comments, in order to enable us to get through this agenda item. Let us now turn our attention to agenda item 5 on digital sequence information on genetic resources. As a reminder, the mandate of the working group is to make recommendation to the Conference of the Parties at its 15 meetings on how to address DSI in the context of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. You will recall that we made good progress at the fourth meeting with the adoption of Recommendation 4.2. The recommendation included a request for the informal co-chair advisory group to continue its works and provide advice on several areas and elements related to DSI. Today, we will hear a brief report from the co-leads of the informal advisory group regarding the progress on intersessional work. Then we will look quickly on document CBD Working Group 2020-05 prepared by the Secretariat, and we'll open the floor for a limited number of general comments on Section 3 of the document. As these are new elements that emerge from the work of the informal advisory group, not previously considered in the open-ended working group. The reflection and remark contained in this document, as well as the report from the IAG, will be considered alongside recommendation 4.2 as the basis for the discussion of the working group. We would like now to invite the co-lead for the informal advisory group to introduce their reports. I'd like the floor be given to South Africa to give this report. South Africa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Shukran, Siyadat Rais.
Of my co-lead, Mr. Gaute Hansen, and myself, I am happy to present our report on the outcomes of the work of the Informal Coaches Advisory Group on Digital Sequence Information on Genetic Resources, which covers the work carried out since the fourth meeting of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This report can be found in document CBD/Working Group 2020/5/INF1. As you will recall, the IAC was established to provide advice and feedback on the issue of DSI to the co-chairs and the executive secretary. The group met 6 times, including an organizational meeting, to discuss the topics that the working group tasked it with in Nairobi. Sessions were held on lessons learned from other mechanisms and potential for mutual supportiveness, multilateral and hybrid approach proposals and considerations, and the assessment of the proposed policy options. The fair and care principles of data governance were summarized in a note that is annexed to our report, while the issues of legal feasibility and the scope of DSI were addressed in a cross-cutting manner during the different sessions. Concerning the assessment of the proposed policy options, the consultant who was hired to conduct an independent assessment of the policy options using the matrix of criteria agreed by the IAC. The consultant could not complete the work due to unforeseen reasons. In order to fill this gap, the IAC agreed that its members, including parties, non-parties, IPLC, or stakeholders' representatives, will conduct their own assessments. The Secretariat organized an online discussion forum to facilitate exchange of ideas and the members shared their assessment within the group. The compilation of this assessment can be seen in our report as well as the Executive Secretary's note on DSI. Together with the answers to a question on whether to consider the proposed policy solution any further, the policy option assessments show a clear emerging trend. The option on capacity building, technical and scientific collaboration and technology transfer was deemed an essential part of a solution on DSI. The options proposing a multilateral mechanism of benefit sharing yielding interest except for the one proposing a payment for access to data, as it might hinder research and innovation. However, all these multilateral options requires further information, particularly the development of modalities on benefits distribution. Finally, all the solutions that do not promote benefit sharing or that propose a bilateral solutions were assessed negatively, except for the bilateral solution with global standardized mutual agreed terms, which could be considered as part of a hybrid solution. We hope that the outcome of this work will help the working group in focusing its negotiations and agree on a recommendation for the COP. Finally, we would like to thank all the members of the Informal Coaches Advisory Group for their hard work, dedication, and positive spirit in the 15 months since we began this journey. They met a total of 16 times to discuss 23 topics related to DSI and listen to 34 presentations from experts. It has been a privilege and honor for my co-lead and I to work with this group. They showed us what an inclusive and representative group can achieve in a context of mutual respect, rigor, and professionalism. We thank the co-chairs for the trust they have given us to lead this work and the Secretariat for its support. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Chiva Ulamuni, and thank you, Mr. Voigt Hansen, for your work, and you've totally deserved the trust we put in you. It will now open the floor for comments on document CBD, Working Group 2020-05, especially section 3. Considering the time available, we ask delegates to keep their intervention brief and to the point. I see a request for the floor from Namibia. Namibia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you.
Microphone for Namibia, please. It's been lost.
Namibia, if you press the button, I think it will turn around.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you for the floor and thank you for the report. We had a look at the report and in particular section 3, and we think that it is a fair distillation of the work that has been done by the informal advisory group. We think it adequately covers the state of agreement and disagreement or further clarification that would be needed to come to an agreement on DSI. And as you know, Africa is, of course, very desirous of having a solution to the DSI benefit sharing question included in the global biodiversity framework. So we would be ready to agree to this section being turned into a document for further consideration by the contact group for negotiation. Would also appreciate some guidance from you about how you see the reporting, the choreography of the reporting on DSI and on the Global Biodiversity Framework to the COP when we get to that point. Thank you, Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Namibia. We will now hear from Argentina, followed by the United Kingdom. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and I would like to make this intervention on behalf of GRULAC and as a reaction to the proposals. As you know, digital sequence information is a subject essential for my region, and going straight to the point, GRULAC would like to make some considerations of what is essential for us that the COP decision on DSI includes. First, we think that the decision should recognize DSI under the scope of the Convention due to the intrinsic relationship between DSI and genetic resources. Second, the decision should recognize existing ABS national systems and that in specific cases, the use of DSI may allow bilateral benefit sharing. Third, should promote international cooperation for the development and improvement of ABS systems, including through fulfilling commitments of technology transfer and capacity building. Fourth, it should recognize that the distinctive nature of DSI allows for the creation of a multilateral global fund for benefit sharing, for example, through the activation of the Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol. This will contribute to mobilizing resources from all sources, allowing the private sector to contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. 5, we think the decision should affirm that ABS on DSI should not hinder and should promote scientific research and innovation. 6th, it should set actions to close the existing gap in obtaining and utilizing DSI through international cooperation, providing and/or facilitating access for and transfer of technology and capacity building. 7th, it should recognize the rights of IPLCs, in particular with regards to traditional knowledge and associated with genetic resources. 8th, it should include a mention of DSI clearly in the Global Biodiversity Framework, in particular in Goal C and Target 13, as well as mentions to ABS in general in Goal D and Target 19.1. And finally, we think the decision should adopt a mandate with a specific timeline until COP16 to negotiate the modalities and implementation of the global hybrid mechanism to share benefits of DSI. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. We'll go to United Kingdom, followed by Colombia. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK believes that we have made good progress on the path to COP, both in Geneva, where we agreed what a solution on DSI should deliver, and through the work of the Informal Advisory Group. Turning to Section 3 of the note by the Executive Secretary, the UK believes that the note correctly summarises those areas on which there is agreement. Capacity building and technology transfer should be a key feature of any approach. Indigenous peoples and local communities should be the primary beneficiaries of benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources, and benefits shared should be used primarily for the purposes of conservation and sustainable use. Any approach should be adaptive and support unhindered scientific progression, and open access to data remains of critical importance. As is also identified in Section 3, the UK agrees that a bilateral approach, including the bilateral approach laid out by the Nagoya Protocol, is not appropriate for benefit sharing for DSI on genetic resources. The UK would like to go further and suggest that first, on the basis that time is of the essence, we should focus our attention in the coming days on drafting a decision which we could pass to COP. And second, and building on the comments from my colleague in Argentina, that this decision could begin to explore the principles according to which a multilateral solution could operate and be governed. Finally, we recognise that other international processes and treaties are looking to the CBD for an outcome. Working together across these processes will be crucial as the discussion progresses and a solution emerges. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. We'll go to Colombia, followed by Norway. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We align our intervention with the one made by our distinguished colleague from Argentina on behalf of GRULAC. And we want to say that Colombia appreciates the great efforts that the Secretariat has made to resolve existing divergences and find a way to address DSI in the context of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Likewise, we welcome the work of the ad hoc technical expert group and the co-chair's informal advisory group. Colombia considers that the work carried out constitutes an important advance and a good basis to build progress and move forward towards the construction of an ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which allows the balanced implementation of the 3 objectives of the Convention and to achieve the vision of living in harmony with nature. Regarding document CBD-WG2020-05/3, Colombia welcomes the proposed elements to consider as a way forward regarding DSI of genetic resources. Particularly for Colombia, it is essential that the decision adopted on DSI by COP15 is built based on the following elements. First, the benefits derived from the use of DSI must be shared fairly and equitably to contribute to the fulfillment of the 3 objectives of the Convention and in accordance with the principles agreed in paragraphs 5 and 6 of document CBD-WG2020 REC/3/2. Second, clear and ambitious actions must be agreed for all stakeholders in order to contribute to increasing capacities and reducing the existing gap to produce and use DSI. Third, establish a clear and implementable roadmap in the short and medium term with the aim of setting a mechanism for the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits derived from the use of DSI. In this regard, Colombia considers that future work should focus on the modalities for distributing said benefits based on the results of the annex to document CBD-WG2020-5/3 and the additional modalities contained in the appendix to document CBD-WG2020-REC/4/2. The distribution of benefits derived from the use of DSI must also be considered in the strategies of resource mobilization and capacity building as an integral package of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Finally, Colombia calls on the parties to continue this process in a flexible and comprehensive spirit, as well as to consider the results and analysis of the formal and informal dialogues that have been held on this matter. As a mega-diverse country, Colombia firmly believes that a balance in the 3 objectives of the Convention is essential to place our countries on paths of sustainable development, which will enable the task of reversing biodiversity loss. Thank you.
Thank you. Colombia, now we'll be listening to Norway, followed by DRC. Can the floor be given to Norway, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. From the 10th to the 11th of November, the informal retreat on digital sequence information, DSI, was organized by the ABS Capacity Development Initiative on behalf of the South African government and the Norwegian government as part of the global dialogue on DSI. The meeting was hosted by the government of the Netherlands and followed a meeting organized by the EU Commission, also on DSI. The objective of the DSI retreat was to promote a deeper mutual understanding of different perceptions, interests, and concerns regarding a potential future DSI system. In addition to key global negotiators, a small number of recognized DSI experts and representatives of IPLCs were invited to support the retreat by contributing knowledge and perspectives. Participants attended in their personal capacities. Participants exchanged and explained their views on the following 3 topics. 1. Open access to and use of DSI, unpacking the meaning of open access. 2. Benefit sharing from the use of DSI, unpacking different visions. 3. Implications of various benefit sharing approaches, sharing hopes and fears. A summary of the meetings is posted as an information document on the webpage of the 5th meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Norway. We'll now turn to la République démocratique du Congo.
The Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor. Please give the floor to the DRC. Thank you very much, co-chairs, for giving me the floor. So regarding this sequence information on genetic resources, this is extremely important vis-a-vis the biodiversity of these resources. Thus, the DRC is of the view that a global framework, for it to be complete, must have a solution vis-a-vis the just and equitable sharing of the use of these resources. Also, these advantages will be both monetary and non-monetary, and there are several key principles that have emerged in the COP. There have been discussions on DSN, which should be raised. First and foremost, the advantages of the use should be shared in a just and equitable way when it comes to digital sequence information on genetic resources, because this has to do with the rational use of these resources. Secondly, access to genetic resources in public databases must remain open and free. And here I wish to stress that open access is different from free access, and there must be a careful complementary mechanism put into place to ensure that there is free access and ensure that open access has modalities in place. Third, indigenous communities and local communities are also extremely important in this issue, and they must be direct beneficiaries of the benefits gained and the use of the benefits of these resources. Fourthly, capacity building and technology transfer for developing countries providing genetic resources are elements that are important. They must underpin all our principles that guide us when it comes to DSI. And finally, I must stress that there are cases where the bilateral sharing mechanism for these resources under the Nagoya Protocol is not applicable, and thus multilateral mechanisms, sharing mechanisms, must be further implemented as reflected in the text of the Convention on Biological Diversity and as mentioned in the ITPGRFA. They've already planned a multilateral mechanism under this treaty to share these benefits, and this should be used here because we are in agreement that other global mechanisms and other international mechanisms are required so as to evaluate these principles under the WHO's principles, and this is relevant also under the treaties of the IPO. I thank you.
Sorry, and I did no way reflection on the intervention from the distinguished delegate from DRC. We'll now move on to Guatemala, followed by the European Union. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the first time that Guatemala takes the floor, and this delegation would like to thank China and Canada and the CBD Secretariat and all those that have facilitated the organization of these important meetings. Guatemala firmly supports the declaration made by Argentina on behalf of GULAC, considering that all of the elements expressed are in the best interests of our country. This delegation would like to highlight the intrinsic relationship between digital sequence information and valuing the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. We support the creation of a multilateral mechanisms for benefit sharing as a hybrid solution that would also enable the bilateral sharing whenever possible to determine the origin of the genetic resource, and this under the Nagoya Protocol, and these resources are associated with traditional knowledge. Similarly, it's necessary to establish mechanisms for the traceability of products arising from access to genetic resources, and in this option you would have digital sequencing for genetic resources, both in databases and in commercial products that are generated through this digital sequencing. These mechanisms could be identifying the origin or a unique origin through tracing. And Guatemala supports the renewal of the special expert group so that it examines the diversity of all these issues related to digital sequencing information. And we'd like to present in writing a series of amendments and recommendations to the draft, and we will participate in the discussions of the contact group. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Guatemala will.
Thank you very much, Guatemala.
European Union, followed by Turkey. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and we also express our appreciation to the work of the informal advisory group and of the co-chairs, co-leads of that advisory group. We reiterate our willingness to continue engaging in further discussions on this very complex and critical issue. The European Union's member states take note of the co-leads report on the work of the informal advisory group on DSI and of contributions by the members of the group, including the multi-criteria matrix exercise to assess the DSI policy options. This exercise provides valuable inputs for further discussion. However, we note that the assessment carried out by the IAG is not equivalent to an independent analysis. We acknowledge that the policy options under scrutiny are only very generally described, or are rather archetypes. Many issues related to these options remain still to be clarified, such as scope, modalities, and aspects related to their implementation. We see a need to narrow down further the number of options on the table. In this regard, we believe that the IAG discussions provided us with a better idea of which options might have a greater or lower potential. Additional work should focus on narrowing down the number of options, taking into account the principles agreed by parties at Open-Ended Working Group 3 and reflected in the document CBD-WG2020-05/REC/3/2. In our view, options based on a multilateral approach might better meet some principles and criteria. However, also these options still require additional exploration, in particular concerning the impact on research and development, as well as their operational modalities. In a further analysis and assessment, the EU and its member states will continue to support the involvement of stakeholders from all different categories and IPLC's representatives. Further work should also focus on capacity building and development and technological transfer in support of, to support generating, accessing and use of DSI in developing countries, and on scientific cooperation, research and innovation for the purpose of conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. On this basis, we look forward to continuing the discussions in the upcoming 3 weeks. We also have more specific comments on the elements proposed in Section 3 of the document for a way forward. And I think concerning these recommendations, we would say that the EU and its member states support the conclusions under paragraph 21A. This should serve to reduce the overall number of policy options and allow for a more detailed elaboration and assessment. Further work should focus primarily on multilateral policy options. The EU and member states also support enhanced technical and scientific cooperation and capacity building and development as an important component. On point B, the EU and its member states believe that options based on hybrid approaches that combine multilateral and bilateral elements do not meet the criteria of a simple, frictionless, easily implementable system that preserves open access, decouples access and benefit sharing, avoids cumbersome and costly implementation measures such as tracking and tracing, and ensuring legal certainty. Therefore, we do not believe that these options should be further explored, and the suggestion under point B doesn't seem to be coherent with the acknowledgement that an approach to DSI should be simple to develop and implement. On point C, the EU and Member States have a strong view that benefits should be distributed and targeted at conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and support the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, and recognize that IPLCs should be among the primary beneficiaries. Concerning the distribution of benefits, we believe that additional work to explore the most appropriate criteria and the implications is needed. We are open to exploring the idea that the geographic distribution of the genetic resources from which DSI were established could be taken into account as one of the possible criteria for the distribution of benefits in the context of the multilateral system. However, we believe that this aspect still requires further discussion and should be part of a consequent process of exploration of the modalities for a solution for DSI, together with other distributional criteria like the based on greatest needs. The EU fully agrees with the elements under D that any approach should be without prejudice to existing rights and responsibilities under the Convention and the Nagoya Protocol. However, the word responsibility is not sound and should be replaced by obligations. On point E, the EU and Member States believe that consideration should primarily be given to options that are simple and easily implementable in order to be also implemented rapidly. At the same time, the EU and Member States caution against a hasty selection of one option that is not fully developed to be implemented on a pilot basis. The selection of one option any option would have to go hand in hand with a proper assessment of whether that option meets the necessary criteria as listed above, and whether it can deliver the expected outcomes. This should include an assessment of the costs of implementation and of the benefits generated. Once this further assessment is completed and on the basis of its outcomes, a pilot phase may be considered, pending further clarification on how such a pilot would be operationalized. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, we take the opportunity also to inform other parties that the European Commission organized from the 8th to the 9th of September an international exchange on digital sequence information with stakeholders. The objective of the exchange was to promote a deeper mutual understanding of perspectives among global academic and commercial DSI users of different sectors and to elaborate key messages for DSI negotiators. Besides DSI users from public and private sectors from more than 20 countries from different regions, a small number of DSI experts and representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities were invited to support the exchange. The exchange was a valuable opportunity to hear stakeholders' views and inputs on what could work or not work as a possible benefit-sharing solution for DSI, as well as how benefits should be shared and targeted to support conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. On each of the topics discussed, key messages were elaborated by the participants, and they are included in the report that was published by the CBD Secretariat for consideration of negotiators. The report can be found in the section Other of the WG5 website, and we hope that delegates will have an opportunity to look at it. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Merci à l'Union européenne. Colleagues, we have
Thank you very much, European Union.
a request for the floor, and we need to manage very carefully our time. My suggestion is that we hear two more interventions, and then we recreate contact group 5, which will be continuing the dialogue. So it is not about blocking anybody from making any intervention, but it's a way to be able to continue the intervention. The suggestion is for that contact group to resume its work immediately at the beginning of the afternoon session. So it's just a matter of waiting a couple hours. So I hope this is acceptable to all. So let's hear from Turkey. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair, for the floor. As Turkey, we appreciate also the ambitious work of the working group on its fourth meeting and also the work of IAG to find a solution for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits for DSI on genetic resources. Although it is important to have an agreement for how to handle ABS for DSI immediately, Turkey observes the complexity of the process and the necessity for a well-discussed, deliberate solution for both the interests of the owner of genetic resources for which DSI is originated and also DSI users. State sovereignty over their natural resources and their rights for benefits from the utilization of DSI should be taken into account properly. Meanwhile, scientific research should not be hindered as well. Turkey supports a hybrid approach for benefit sharing, which requires a bilateral mechanism for endemic species and a multilateral mechanism for DSI of genetic resources of unknown origin and for sequences belonging to different countries of origin. In case single and multiple genetic sequences belongs to different countries, benefits could be shared directly with the countries of origin by an international system. In terms of accession to DSI, we support open access to databases only if DSI in databases is labeled with the country of origin of genetic resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Turkey. We'll now hear from Japan, and then we will move to the creation of the contact group. Once again, this is not to block anything. This discussion will continue with in the contact group. Japan, can the floor be given to Japan, please?
Thank you, Chair. We appreciate the contribution of many parties and others to the discussions. However, we are concerned about the informal discussions that took place after OEWG4, which some parts were not based on the process agreed upon in past official meetings, including OEWG3, 4, and the way the discussions were moved in a very hasty manner, just trying to find a conclusion. We believe that due consideration should be given to the situation where DSI contributes to so many public interests. We hope that the OEWG and the subsequent COPs will continue to carefully consider many views and various options that have been identified in past meetings, and that such views and options should not be ruled out based on short discussions or informal dialogues. We will make detailed arguments at contact groups and other meetings, but we believe it is necessary to ensure that the process and the discussions are rational and accountable to science, industry, and all the stakeholders. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, we had a very useful discussion, and I'm sure this discussion will continue in the same manner in contact group. I see Brazil requesting for the floor. Brazil, can the floor be given to Brazil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not any statement, a question, procedural question. My understanding of the rules of procedures is that when a party has a proposal to bring, it must be made during the plenary and not during the contact group. So Brazil has a proposal to make, so I'm in your hands. If you allow that Brazil make this proposal during the contact group and it's accepted by you, the chairs, and with the understanding of the parties, and I cannot wait for the CGU. Otherwise, I would to make use of the time now to do it. Thank you.
Brazil, I think it's perfectly acceptable that you make that proposal in the contact group. So if I'm reminded that it would be useful if you can post your statement online now. Delegates, so we had a good exchange, heard a number of views. We will need to continue that, and we would like to invite Contact Group 5 to continue its works on this agenda item. Ms. Letitia Chita-Wolomoni of South Africa and Mr. Gothe Voigt Hansen from Norway will continue to serve as co-lead of this contact group. Contact Group 5 will work further on the recommendation to COP15, taking into account recommendation 4.2 and document CBD Working Group 2020-05 in light of the intervention you shared with us in plenary today and those that will follow. Contact Group 5 will meet at 3 p.m. in the Marguerite Room 230A Can I take it this is acceptable to all? Thank you. I'm reminded, as I mentioned to Brazil, to upload this statement. I think it would be wise for all of you that ask for the floor to upload your statement. You will get the opportunity to speak to them in the contact group. Let's upload them at this point here. So, colleagues, this complete this agenda item, and I'll turn to Francis now. Francis, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair. Just bear with me 1 minute. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair. Dear delegates, this brings us to the end of our plenary meeting today. I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for any announcements. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Secretary wishes to clarify the time of the contact group this afternoon. You have just heard that the contact group 5 on DSI will meet from 3 to 4 in Magari room 230A. And then contact group 4 will meet from 4 to 6 p.m. in Nahani room 230B. Contact group 6 will meet from 3 to 6 p.m. in St. John room 210E. Delegates are kindly invited to check the schedule displayed on the monitors and the meeting webpage for the latest information, including on the meeting times and location of contact group. And also I want to remind distinguished delegates to upload any intervention delivered today within 1 hour after the closure of this plenary to facilitate the work of the report writers. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Dear delegates, this now brings us to the conclusion of our meeting today. As explained earlier this morning session, our next plenary meeting is scheduled for Monday, 5th December, during the evening session. At that time, we will hear reports of the work by the contact groups, adopt the CRPs and L documents based on their work, before we proceed to discuss other matters, adopt the report, and close the meetings under items 6, 7, and 8, respectively. So until then, we wish you productive discussions. This meeting is adjourned.